Today, I want to tell you a story that will lead us to not just one more very important thought about the KEF Q Concerto Meta, but potentially all speakers. And the philosophical premise of this story is as follows. So if you have a mechanical watch and you look at it, you know what time it is, right? But if you have two mechanical watches and they read different times from one another, you're never quite sure what the time is. And that's because you don't know which watch is closest to the correct time. Or maybe they're both wrong.
This episode is brought to you by Bowers Wilkins, makers of the PI8 True Wireless IEM. Click the link in the show notes for more information.
Now, before we start, how about the Flaming Lips' best album, The Soft Bulletin? And this came out, I think, in 99 or was it 2000? I can never remember. Oh, 99, it says so on the bloody cover. And you can also see that this is a 25th anniversary edition, but also a ZOETROPE edition. So that means that this vinyl is a picture disc, a double picture disc set, which has this very cool pattern printed on it. And obviously this plays like a normal record. And as it spins, it's meant to create an optical illusion of objects moving, I guess, against each other and towards each other in terms of speed. But one thing I found out, because this is my first ZOETROPE vinyl, one thing I found out about these is that they don't really do what they intend to do to the naked eye. You have to film them to really see the animation patterns that they create. And yeah, this was a bit of a disappointment actually, and it cost me an absolute fortune. I think it was like 65 US dollars for the record, 20 bucks shipping, 20 bucks import duty. So this is a $100 record. Can't say I'm really happy about that, but it's still a wonderful album, absolutely wonderful, produced by David Friedman. Sounds very psychedelic. I guess you call it, yeah, indie rock. And I've been playing this quite a bit through the KEF Q Concerto Meta these past few weeks. And that is subsequent to the video about the KEF Q Concerto Meta that we made in the middle of November. And that video has clocked up 80,000 views or thereabouts. So thank you to everyone who has watched it so far. Now, as you will have learned from that video, the Concerto is a three-way stand mount loudspeaker. And being a three-way, the Concerto has independent mid-range and bass drivers. And today I want to focus on that 6.5-inch bass driver, because after that review video went online, a reviewer pal called me and he said he thought the Concerto were punchier in the low end than I gave them credit for. So, okay. Now, during my time with the Concerto in Portugal, which is where I filmed most of that video actually, I drove the KEF with some NAD gear. So the M66 preamp and the M23 power amp. And that pairing sells for close to 10 grand. So that's probably overkill for the KEF. And I'm not only talking about the price, because the M23 gives us 200 watts per channel into 8 ohms, but the Concerto are rated by KEF as a 4 ohm nominal speaker. So we should look at the NAD M23's 4 ohm power rating, which I believe is 380 watts per channel. And that's a long way north of KEF's recommended maximum amplifier power of 180 watts per channel. Now, nearby to that NAD stack, I had the Hegel H590, and when I swapped out the NAD for the Hegel, I noticed that the Norwegian lent the KEF a punchier bass. Now, note here, I'm not talking about deeper bass, but bass with more dynamic thrust. So I had to ask myself, was this what my reviewer friend was talking about? Perhaps it was. Now that NAD to Hegel switcheroo took place on my last day in Lisbon, and it caught me off guard because the NAD and the Hegel don't really differ massively, I don't think, on power delivery. The bigger differences lie in their topologies. So the NAD is a Class D design and the Hegel a Class AB. Now back in Berlin, I've been testing more recently the Quad 33 and 303 pre-power combo. Well, technically I've been running a pair of 303 as monoblocks with the 33 preamp. Now that 3-box setup gives us 170 watts into 4 ohms, 170 watts per channel. And that's none too dissimilar to the 160 watts per channel coming from the Audiolab 9000A. But to my ears, the Quad Trio pulls slightly punchier bass from the KEF than that Audiolab integrated. And that's interesting, mainly because the Quad better calms any urge to add a subwoofer to the system, which I sometimes feel with the Audiolab, well, more than I do when I've got the Quad as the amplifier. Now, my findings don't stop there, because the Audiolab sees the KEF kick harder in the low end than the musical Fidelity A1. Now that shouldn't surprise us, because the musical Fidelity gives us 25 watts per channel into 8 ohms, and I looked on Musical Fidelity's website this morning for a 4 ohm rating, but I couldn't see one. But given that it offers 25 watts per channel into 8 ohms, it's unlikely to offer anything more than 50 watts per channel into 4 ohms. Now, in contrast to the Quad, the Musical Fidelity amp has the Concerto sounding dynamically more restrained in the low end. Now, I quite like that type of sound in this room because I don't need to drive the room as much as I do my room in Lisbon. That's an acoustically larger space, and there I'd probably go for the Quad setup or the Hegel Big Boy, especially when watching movies, because I have subsequently learnt that in my experience, I think the Concerto are a better home theatre speaker than either of the Lintons. Now here in Berlin, I hear the most vivid bass from the Concerto when they are connected to the Luxman L-505Z. Now the Luxman's 4 ohm rating is 150 watts per channel, so kind of similar to the Quad, to the Audiolab, and yet I get punchier bass from that Luxman than I do from the Quad or the Audiolab. Now I know I've quoted a lot of amplifier power ratings in this video, but please don't get too hung up on the numbers. In fact, I mentioned them so they really aren't part of this story necessarily. I mean, I don't want you to lose the wood for the trees. And whether you prefer a punchy bass or a more timid bass from the KEF really isn't the issue here either. No, the point today is that the KEF's bass dynamics vary quite a bit with amplifier choice. So this has me asking, which of these amplifiers is exposing the KEF's true personality? Is it the NAD, or is it the Hegel, or is it the Luxman, or the Musical Fidelity, or is it the Quad, or the Audiolab? I guess it's a bit like having 2 or more mechanical watches where we're never quite sure of the correct time. So this finding underscores for me the importance of testing a loudspeaker with a range of amplifiers. But it doesn't just apply to people like me, like reviewers. So if you audition the KEF Q Concerto Meta at a high street dealer, I think you should ask if it's possible to hear them with more than one amp. So that way you'll get to hear more of what those speakers are capable of. But you should know that I don't hear as much bass or low end variation when I switch amps on the Wharfedale Super Linton, because I think its amplifier derived differences are more pronounced in the treble than in the bass. But my main point today is this, is when we listen to music through loudspeakers, but with a range of different amplifiers, we get to hear firsthand how there is no singular truth about the sound of that loudspeaker. Anyway, if you like this video, you know what to do, And yeah, subscribe to this channel if you feel so inclined, and hit us up on Patreon if that's your thing as well. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching. Oh, and I have one more thought about this one more thought. So yeah, the amplifier obviously makes a difference to the sound of loudspeakers, but it doesn't make as much of a difference to the sound of the speakers as our room acoustics. So if you're going to go and listen to a pair of loudspeakers at High Street Dealer, I would urge you to ask them if you can listen in an acoustically treated room so that it removes the room from the equation when you're making a buying decision.